I'm saying hello to everyone from Dubai and from my home. We recently had a little bit of an ease in lockdown restrictions here, so we can go outside and take a walk, which is good. But it still doesn't deny the fact that everybody around the world is in a state of confinement. As Upasana said, I'm a journalist based in Dubai, where I have been living for the past 11 years. I'm speaking from Dubai, and I'm really delighted to be here. And as Upasana said, until November, I was the editor-in-chief of Harper's Bazaar Art, and covering mostly the Manassa region, and until recently also Africa, quite in depth, all of the art and culture scene. And I'm now an independent writer and journalist and art and design consultant. Throughout the last 10 years of my time in the UAE, I've traveled a lot to India, and India is really, it's been one of my favorite places to discover. So I'm honestly very thrilled to have the opportunity to be here. I'm very grateful to Upasana and Ashvita and International Foundation for the Arts for inviting me to moderate this talk. And I am joined by an incredible group of female artists. I couldn't ask for, a more powerful panel. Tanya Goel, Rekha Rodwittiya, and Reena Kallat. And I'm sure everyone in the audience knows their work. They really push boundaries with what they do, with the materials they use, with the themes that they talk about. And so we're about to have a very interesting conversation. A few months ago, I would have never imagined that I would be asked to moderate a talk virtually. And while we heard whispers of the coronavirus and its deadly effects, most people went on with their lives and didn't think about what would happen if we were also placed in lockdown like China has. But it has come to pass, and we are now where we all are, and we're having this talk virtually. And while it is challenging, I'm also, the silver lining is that I'm quite grateful that we've had this experience, because I'm able to connect with people like you from all over the world, still virtually, we are able to send these messages. Something that I guess, struggled with as a journalist also right now is that we're bombarded, as we spoke about the other day, with lots of news, with lots of negative news about, the terrible situation of our world, hard news, and the social-economic effects that have really devastated people around the globe. No one will go untouched by the coronavirus. It's a virus that doesn't know class, race, gender, celebrity status. It's something that affects all of us. So we're all in the same position. We're all vulnerable. And the art world, a world that we all operate in, which is a really wonderful world, but has become incredibly fast-paced in recent years, is now put on hold. So we all watched in March as art fairs and art exhibitions and everything was canceled. And so now we're relegated to seeing art on our screens, on our phones, and on our computers. And that's changed incredibly the nature of what art is for this period. And we do not know how long this period will last. A friend of mine the other day sent me some statistics that stated that art sales are down 90 to 95%. And that is scary. We're not here to talk about the art market, but the fact of the matter is that we don't have the same platforms that we used to have in terms of buying and selling and just conversing, the same audience that we had before with art. So we're in a new landscape and we're navigating the unknown. But what I'd like to talk about here, and which is obviously the title of this conversation, Art in a State of Crisis, is what is art's role today, and how can artists, what does the arts mean? How can it help us transcend the conflict, and how difficult? What are the challenges at stake right now? And so I'd love to start off the conversation first by asking each of you, and you're all coming from different parts of India, how has the lockdown been for you? Maybe we first start with Rekha, and you can tell us where you're based in India and sort of your experience with the lockdown and what kind of work you're creating, or maybe you're not even creating work, maybe you're processing.
Yes, thank you. Lovely to be with all of you. It's sort of like a sort of surreal situation, because as you rightly said in your introduction, it wasn't something that any one of us thought would touch us. It was always about something slightly far away from us. And from one day to the next, our lives really have changed. I think that, when you're looking at the histories of how, such calamities affect people, it's not always immediately that these kinds of crises and disaster really hits you because you're sort of caught in the here and the now of coping with the reality. But I do believe that, given a couple of months, if not earlier, we are, as creative people, really going to start percolating this kind of isolation that has encompassed us. The difference with the isolation that we have today in relation to being practitioners who also actually embrace isolation as artists, because that's the very nature of most artists' works, is different because there is a choice of how you create your mobility and what you do with your isolation. This is an isolation that has actually brought about a kind of confrontation of mortality in a way that I think, as you stated in your introduction, cuts across all class, whether economic, geographic spaces, and it sort of reduces, it brings another dimension to the notions of what democracy is about. It sort of levels everybody out to the same space. I have a similar rhythm, so to speak, because as an artist, I have my studio in my home by choice, and so the fact of me being able to take myself to work remains the same. But certainly it's impacting me in ways where the kind of spaces of assistance that I get, whether it's to print something or whether it's to gain access to references, is now something that I have to rely forth in a different way. I think above and beyond anything else, I would like to sort of state briefly before I let the next panelist, have the floor, is that I have to say that, Rebecca, we are privileged, at least those of us on the panel today, because we are in, we are in circumstances of awareness and consciousness and safety that is much greater than many other people. And I think that in India, precisely if I have to talk about India, the disparity of economics is not something one can ignore at a time like this. So it weighs heavy on me as an artist that in many ways, the tools that I possess are not activist tools. My tools are a communicator through the work that I do, and I may do certain other activist interventions, but my main core and axis in terms of communicating with the world and negotiating with the world, deciphering the world, is through my art. And right now, I'm quite amputated in how to reach across to deliver the compassion, to deliver the empathy that I really feel. So that has impacted all of us, and I think me, as an artist, I think I would make that as a statement.
Yeah, I've heard this many times over the last few weeks from other friends who are also artists, the idea of feeling amputated, cut off. But still, of course, as you said, artists have been creating in isolation for a long time. It's important to have that moment on your own. And to go to the next panelist, Tanya, we were all looking forward to Art Dubai. That was the next fair on the schedule, at least for me. And so you had Art Basel, you had Art Dubai, you had a very busy schedule, and suddenly everything just stopped. And you also have been, following your work and really sort of lured by, kind of the mix of geometric and multimedia that you incorporate in. I'm hearing a little bit of sound again. How has it been to stop, suddenly this crazy schedule? And then perhaps you can also tell us a little bit about how has stopping in isolation since you've returned to India affected the work? You've just sent me something today that you've created, so I would love to know about that as well. I'm hearing a bit of noise.
Am I audible to all?
Yeah.
So there's a few things that occurred to me in the very first week of lockdown, and I sort of self-quarantined a week before India actually, officially announced curfew, because I was under government-imposed quarantine. I was a U.S. return Indian citizen. I was in Philadelphia, for my museum show at the Philly Museum of Art, which the preview was, cancelled on the afternoon of, and I had to literally flee from there. So there's a lot of running away from the US, fear of not being stuck in the United States for like 3 months. I mean, that fear alone was, enough to like kill me. So anyways, when I got back to India, I had a it was strange seeing a lot of people, still not a place where I'd already sort of seen it unfurl. But anyway, a few thoughts that I had, which are perhaps more poetic, is that I think I do what I suffered from for the first fortnight was a very, very deep fear of the abstract. For me, I feel that the form of abstract. So what I suffered from, I wasn't allowed to go outside, and going outside meant that since they were also tracking my cell phone, meant that I might be imprisoned, or they might come and track me. So there was a lot of fear, and that is something that I suppose I was negotiating with. I felt even pre-lockdown, I felt quite imprisoned, so to speak. And yeah, what it has made me, make me really like do is, I suppose, look around me within my inside, within like what is inside in relationship to outside, and that's something that I've been doing. Rebecca, could you shoot some more questions at me, please? I'm sort of, or should we take it to Reena and then come back?
You jump, but and yeah, you were saying yesterday that in some ways it was good to kind of slow down for a second and take a pause.
Oh yeah, I didn't address my hyper participation in art fairs. I think I was quite happy when I got a call from Peter Nagy, who was in New York for his own solo with Jeffrey Deitch, and he called me and he said, Tanya, just take a holiday. All the deadlines called off. I was on the 26th of March, I suppose, was at the bar, and then I was also doing the commission for the booth, for the Julius Baer Bank booth. So I was working 21 hours a day. I mean, I had back-to-back deadlines. I was very relieved. It's quite strange because I'm only feeling the loss of what I didn't show, because I did produce make all the work. I did research for over a year for these projects. So in the last 1 week, after the fear has sort of settled, the dust has settled in a way, and we are all sort of, I at least have mutated into a new sense of being and a new sense of, new understanding of my surroundings, of my practice. And I think that what I've been feeling since the last 3 days is a lot of weird sense of loss, and it's weird. Yeah.
And have you managed to still create work? Do you feel inspired even though you're in isolation, and you still feel maybe the sense of loss, or do you feel the need to take a pause?
I think I'm a very, very active person. Like, I have to constantly do something, otherwise I drive everybody around me like, crazy. So what I started doing immediately was literally like, I mean everybody does this, is everybody has a phone, and we do have a garden. I'm very lucky that I had a garden to go. I was at my parents' house. I'm at my parents' house, so I can go out into the garden, which is a private garden, and they cannot arrest me there. So I started taking these videos of overgrown weeds, because I suppose because of as soon as the lockdown started, the gardener could not come to tend to the garden, so everything started overgrowing. And I think a lot of the forms sort of resonated with what might perhaps be the form of this virus that was out there. And so I started documenting the sounds of the evening. We live very close to the airport, so pre-lockdown, you'd hear like 5 planes within 5 minutes, but post-lockdown there was 1 in an hour. So how the sounds of the surroundings changed, and how did conversations enter those videos. And I did a sort of for the first time, I did an interactive project which was aired on Suna Paranta. It's currently on, and yeah.
Amazing. It's fascinating to find. I mean, there is always sort of there is creativity that continues to happen in isolation in different ways. And Reena, on that note, I've been following your practice that really spans a variety of different disciplines, from drawing, photography, sculpture, video, and there's always a bit of, as also you've described, tension in the work, with a particular interest in political and social borders, particularly kind of resonating the aftershocks of the partition in India, and as well as something perhaps that's also something that your family has experienced, or you personally have experienced. So having gone through that, and knowing the nature of your work, how has this lockdown been for you? And you're in Mumbai, if I'm not mistaken. So how have you sort of reacted to it, or how has your work reacted to it?
Well, I mean, like like we all said, there's been such a complete disruption of our lives that, I mean, to just think of the professional side of one's occupation just seems so inconsequential against the sort of more pressing and urgent issues concerning people's lives and livelihoods around us, that I have to say it's taken me quite a lot of time to sort of reboot and get on my feet again. And so to even think of, art in this time of crisis and isolation, while we know it's so central to our lives, whether we realize it or not, I think one was so absorbed by all the other information that one was, taking in and trying to process, that I certainly was not really reacting through my practice, but I've of course been reading and going back to some of my old poems and sort of reconnecting to things that are closest to me. So I think it's also a moment of thinking about the world as it's, around us, as we know that if art is about the human condition here, everything around us has changed, our relationships with people. It's not just the physicality of being in isolation, but which of course, as artists, even like Rekha pointed out, that we're used to this kind of self-imposed, sort of drawing back, and we all do that. We take the time. There may be exhibitions, but then there are all these moments of self-imposed isolation that we need to sort of go back to thinking and re-energizing ourselves. And so this has been a time when I feel like, when of course resources are going to be critical, and freedoms are also going to shrink. While we speak of all the equality or being on the same platform, we know that these are not, it's not going to affect and impact lives in the same manner across the social fabric. So there are a lot of things that, like I said, so at such a time, I think my art was, but of course it's fundamental to even how one used to exist. I think one would just fall in despair if it wasn't for going back and reconnecting and thinking. And so I feel like, most of us do that, right? We go into residencies, we sort of want to redirect our energies and bring some focus and new perspective into life. So in that sense, it has been time, and I'm sure none of us really know the kind of change it's going to bring about, which it certainly will, with all the uncertainties and the huge effect that it's going to have for a very long time.
No, I couldn't agree. I think that the real struggle, the real thing that everyone's grappling with, is this idea of uncertainty. And as you said, Reena, so eloquently, we, artists do go, any creative person needs to go into sort of self-imposed isolation, but perhaps that state happens when, it's self-imposed. Here we are in an imposed isolation. So it's a different, and it's sort of, it is a forced isolation, and we are forced to connect, as you were saying, to people in different ways. And I guess the question I'm having, and whether you're a fashion designer or an artist, right now we're talking about visual art, but do you feel that you can even create, or do you feel that there is sort of a process of grieving and a process of loss before you can start creating again?
For me, it is a continual process. So it's not as though you're not, you are creating in some form or the other. It may not be physically, it may not manifest physically as a painting, but like I said, sometimes you're writing, sometimes you're reading, and so that is a continual process of sort of re-understanding or trying to make sense of where we're going.
Yeah, and one of the big questions, and something we spoke about the other day as well, and Tanya, I'll turn to you, is because this idea that art needs an audience. So we now have a different form of audience, and that sort of is linked as well to what is art if it doesn't have the same sort of audience. So we have to now view art in a very different way. It's through our phones or through the computer. And that obviously changes the connection we have to the art. It changes the energetic connection. It changes the connection you have with each other. You were telling me that you feel that you really do need to have an audience. So how is this lockdown? What is your relationship to the new form of connectivity that we're all in right now in terms of your art creation?
So Rebecca, it's interesting that you bring this question amidst this virtual talk, because as soon as we logged in, I was wondering, where is the audience? I don't know who I'm directing my speech at. Anyway, so given that, I think I'm hooked to Instagram. So my first impulse was to create work for an audience on Instagram. And I think that is what my current project, which is with Suna Pranata Goa, is. And it's actually been, we've been talking about disconnect and different forms of disconnect. But what has happened with someone like me, who's actually quite a hermit and quite an introvert, what this forced form of isolation what it has done is it's opened up a whole new gate of like a whole new avenue of communication. I find myself constantly chatting with strangers who are, sending me pictures of their surroundings via my project, which, they'll send me their sounds, they send me video clips, and it's really quite interesting, because what I have now is this like accumulating Instagram archive of responses, and I don't know what form it will take, but for now I do have an audience, but we did speak yesterday about like what happens to my studio practice, where it's very rooted in the real, very rooted in, I work with like physical surfaces. I work with a lot of materials. I have a color lab. I'm at large a colorist. So what happens to color when you only view it digitally, where we cannot create a visceral surface that has a sort of interaction with the atmosphere? There is no atmosphere in the virtual realm. So these are a lot of, but I think what's interesting, Rebecca, is that I do look at this moment as a like Reena was also saying, as a deep moment of introspection, really looking at what the virtual is. How does the presence of the virtual in the history of art? It's not by any means a new media. This is not a new, it's a new normal, but the mediums that, currently I am exploring are not new. They've been already explored excessively. It's maybe new for me. So yeah, but I think questioning how can one's practice translate from the physical into the digital? How does color translate from virtual to, physical to, you spoke about how everything will be viewed on screens, and another thought occurred to me, which is that there is the screen itself is a physical surface, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's still going to be manufactured, whether it's via printer far into the future, whether currently where is it being manufactured, but it's still, so there's still the real. Even though we keep talking about the hyper virtual, I still think we are still very fortunately rooted in the real.
Yeah, I didn't think of it that way, but it's true. In sort of a conceptual way, I'm still holding you. I'm seeing this. I can't see everyone in the audience, but this still is a physical thing that I'm holding, but with you guys who are obviously on the other side. On that note, I'd love to kind of turn now to Rekha, because I've been, looking at your work as well quite a lot, and the midst of sort of, alienation and longing, and I feel there's also a sense of there's discord, but also accord and transcendence. Do you feel that it is a big question I'm going to ask, but even in times like this, even in times of crisis, do you believe art still has a spiritual role to play? Can it still touch people? Can it still give people hope? And the problem that we're facing is, again, Tanya, you said rightly so, this is a physical object and we still are connected. Can art still kind of retain this purpose, this transcendent state, even via the computer or the digital? It's a big question, but it's just something I'm thinking about as well.
Actually, if you look at, I think we shared this also when we spoke the other day, I am somebody who's, a person who always looks with the idea of hope. I can't live my life unless I believe that there is the possibility of betterment. That's one of the sort of trampolines of my political space. Having said that, it's not a sort of fairy wand that you have. And if you look at the histories that we've had, it plays out that art does play such a vital role, even at the time when it is most sort of suppressed, most kind of where people's voice or people's situations are really, really, in crises. And I think that if you look at the kind of movements that have occurred in the world, where there has been situations of war or, you know, of oppression, there has always been groups of people, individuals that find other individuals and find ways by which the connections of creating that space of hope or that space of articulation. And I think, you know, I'm going to once again say this, I can never tire of saying this, that, you know, we're talking about a certain space of spiritual awareness. And I will go back to Nelson Mandela. I will say that, you know, for a man who was incarcerated for 27 years, without any notion of what his reality may pan out to be, he held that ability to have a vision of hope that could charter and change and, you know, create interventions on a global space that allowed people to understand his movement of truth and reconciliation and his birth of a nation. So having said that, I think that is the underlying factor. I will very much agree with Reena in the sense that art is a product of life. You know, when I say this so often to people, that when people ask me, you know, like, you know, what is it like to be an artist? As if it's some sort of one activity. I am artist, I live art, I breathe art, I think art, I am, you know, every bit of my DNA is that. But that does not mean that that filter does not encompass everything. And so whether we are mother, whether we are, you know, daughter, whether we are teacher, whether, you know, we are observer, whether we are witnessing or victim or crusader or survivor, we will always have this membrane that is our art, and it is, we absorb life via that membrane, and we sort of you know, the osmosis of what we give out is via that membrane. So right now the act of making art is not what makes me an artist. I live as an artist, and so everything that's happening around me, Rebecca, is, you know, filtering into the pores of my existence. And I'm not trying to make a dramatic statement. I'm trying to say that, you know, the anguish that we feel in watching the sort of space of helplessness and hopelessness that many people are facing in relation to water, in relation to food, in relation to education. You know, children are waiting for, they've studied for 9 years or 11 years to give board exams. It's very crucial to them. It may seem very irrelevant to us, you know. And so everybody's life is in some way in a limbo. Some of us are able to hold that limbo with, you know, more facilities, and others are in dire, you know, crises. I think right now, all of us who are art practitioners are aware of that and are deeply impacted by it.
That's something that we spoke about at length as well yesterday, and it's the, you know, the topic I've been talking about a lot about to people, is that this crisis that we're in, while we are all in the same, we are all locked down, but yes, it has brought us together in some ways, and we are all vulnerable, but we have different levels of vulnerability. As you were saying, there's people in India, I mean, not just India, but also in DRC, the Congo, or even in the United States, who are living already in extreme poverty. They're living on the pavement, or they're living and they don't even have the ability to even social distance or even be isolated or even have a space to create art. So, and I think that's been kind of the struggle, I think, with with the whole notion of even creating one's art, is that we are faced with this as well. And I think that the crisis has also shed light on these immense polarizations with people, because even in the midst of the crisis, it isn't fair. Yes, it has touched everyone similarly, but we are in different states of lockdown. And I can't deny that I'm sure that affects a creative person who is, you know, empathetic to the outside world. And that said, you know, what I thought would be interesting to just compare quickly is, you know, Reena and Rekha, you also lived through some periods in India, historical periods that were of big turbulence. You know, you're mentioning, you know, the 1992 riots after the demolition of Babri Masjid, I hope I've said that correctly, the 2002 riots, that contributed to a lot of social turbulence and impacted many artist practices, including, the, India-Pakistan crisis. We won't go too much into politics, but I'd love to know more on sort of an artistic, creative level. How does this lockdown compare to that? Do you feel that maybe you're already prepared? Have you already gone through a turbulent time, or is this different in some way?
Well, one is never really prepared because this is of a completely different nature. But just speaking of examples of when Rekha mentioned Nelson Mandela, I was just thinking of how Shakespeare, who had faced 4 plagues in his lifetime, and while his siblings didn't survive, and he was a baby then, he went on to create his finest pieces of tragedy in times of plague. And when all other production was shut down, in the mayhem of all the production, that he actually wrote Cleopatra and 4 other pieces. So, it's really that moment when you enter deeper realms of understanding what isolation means. And so I think it's going to do different things to different people for sure, and how each artist responds to it. And I'm not quite sure because this is of a different nature. You find spottings by naturalists who are talking about, peacocks found here, and being able to see the Himalayas from, say, from different parts, or the Taj Mahal, for instance, is right now, because of it being shut down, is breathing. So I think there are several sort of things that we are going to see, and how that's going to respond. And also, going back to the question of audience, is that platforms are going to change. We work in different mediums, and we are all going to be, we will be challenged in many ways, and we'll have to respond by new imaginings. And I think that's also a time where a lot of human ingenuity comes into play. You have people making robots that are, taking medicine to patients, but at the same time, we're aware of the sort of dangers of technology and how it could be misused. We're talking of bioterrorism, and sort of historians like Yuval Harari remind us of all the other things that we need to be sort of vigilant about, whether it is about surveillance, the state, and how a lot of what we're being subject to, which is actually meant to aid us, can also sort of go against us. So there are a lot of things that are going to change the way we, and what are the choices we make in these times will be really defining in how we, how we sort of come forth. I think when people say, well, Mother Earth is taking revenge, I don't think it's really revenge. We're probably so inconsequential in the cycles of life and renewal that we don't even matter. And I think that's a huge reminder that something as invisible and non-living can really sort of strap the whole world. So it's a time of global cooperation, solidarity, and I think we'll all have to hold hands together, whether it's, our galleries are doing a lot in terms of coming together and creating new platforms. We've tried to build community through all these years, whether we've had museums, and I think all of those are now finding really innovative ways of going online, or inviting people to respond and reconnect with art. So in LA you have the Hammond Museum, or one of them have, no, sorry, the Getty Museum has actually initiated something where people or fans were asked to sort of perform some of the paintings, taking off from the ideas of, on Instagram and various other platforms, where in, say, in Amsterdam and, in Holland, they've actually been doing this as a practice. So there are going to be many, many new initiatives that will sort of appear and emerge. And so all of us will have to constantly readapt ourselves to the changing times. But sorry, I'm not sure if I've answered your question on.
No, I don't know. I think I'm finding these, these talks. They're always, it's I used to, when you prepare to moderate a talk. Sorry, I'm being very open now, but I feel like I can. You always feel that there's some sort of conclusion, you have to reach at the end, some sort of defining points, or maybe you've discovered something through the talk. I don't know if we can come towards answers in these talks right now, because we're literally faced with the unknown. Everyone is, all these countries now, I mean, the UAE, I'm part of it right now, has announced that they have all these, ease and restrictions, but a lot of people don't feel comfortable with that. So we're all in a state of unknown, and we don't know what the future will look like. We only know what the present is. And on that note, I thought would be really interesting, and something that we spoke about as well the other day is and maybe that's the certainty right now is the unknown, but also our imagination. That even in moments of crisis, as you were saying with Shakespeare or even Mandela, it could be political leaders to artists. I mean, Dostoevsky, some of the great Russian writers and artists. There's always been, or even Tolkien, like there's usually sometimes tragedy spurs, almost ignites the imagination to form, to create beauty. And as you were saying, you're sort of living the art right now. It doesn't necessarily mean you're creating it at this moment in time. It might be that you're taking things in and it will create something afterwards. But I would love to know, your viewpoints on the idea of imagination. Does crisis give impetus to the imagination? I don't know who to ask first, but maybe I'll start with Rekha and then move to Tanya.
It's amazing, Rebecca, how resilient the human spirit is. I think that this is something that has always humbled me. I'm 61, going to be 62 this year, and so I've lived more life than I have left to live. And so when I look at the sort of path of what has been touchstones of influence for me, I realized that no time in history are we absent of these kind of calamities. And I think that the resilience of the human spirit to stand tall is so phenomenal. And I think it just really kind of allows me to feed myself this very important message of hope right now. The thing that bothers me, and I'm going to be, I would need to slightly deviate, is that my concern is, as an artist, that we get, all of us, wherever we may be, that we prompt and we hold accountable the governance of our places, whether it's from the municipal level to the state or the central, or whatever the kind of structures of governance are. We need to be able to recognize that today this is the need of the hour. That as cultural practitioners, we also need to start insisting. There are many art practitioners in India that don't get shown in galleries. They are, we have this huge chasm between what is happening as, folk and tribal practices in our country that are not getting the same kind of equalness and equality, and are not given the kind of focus that they merit. And their lives are economically very, very, very bad. They don't have the kind of privileges that the three of us are on this panel as artists certainly have. And so I would really like for us as artists to be, and I'm sure many of us are conscious that we need to be the voice for these people as well. This hour of crisis needs to make us call attention to their plight, and to see what we can do. I completely agree. I think it's a sort of given basic that the human spirit, being as formidable as it is, equally creates the resurgence of imagination. And it's wonderful to see. Catch yourself in any circumstance of that you were unprepared for, and you will find a way out of it. You will find that your education, your savviness, your ability to think on your feet we'll always find a solution out of it. And that's the same with creativity. We're always going to reinvent and reposition. We're already in a world where, for the younger generation, and I'm a great one, a great spokesperson and a great supporter of technology. But there are times, that I just want to kind of put my, gag when this, seeing people together on Instagram, without the kind of connection. So we already have, these worlds of connectivity that we didn't need a virus to make prominent. I hope, and I this is what perhaps I fear a little bit, that the isolation is going to create more of a breakdown to the collective space that we need to have as individuals, whether we're artists or whether we're just ordinary, people in any field. I think I would hate to feel that my 6-year-old gorgeous grandson is going to have to be educated just via a screen. I hope he has the ability to tumble around with his peers and, have the fun of hide and seek and leapfrog and whatever else it is that makes for you to understand what human contact and the world is all about.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's what I've said the other day. I personally struggle. Well, I think it's wonderful, the museums and galleries and fairs that put things online. It's just, I miss the sort of spiritual connection, that energetic connection. But we have to use the tools that we have, and sort of, on that note, to kind of pass the floor, the space, or whatever you want to call it, to you, Tanya. We spoke about imagination, but also lack of materials, and that kind of links back to what you were saying, Rekha, with supporting emerging artists, or artists who they're really struggling right now. And I think the situation the next few months, if not the next year, 18 months as they unfortunately predict, will be very difficult for some people to even artists or anybody to get the right materials, let alone eat and drink for some people. But you mentioned, Tanya, this idea of it's amazing how artists, they find ways to create with almost anything. I mean, what is your thoughts on sort of imagination in crisis and just using what you have to get by, to create?
I think art making for me, am I audible? Art making for me, I think what a collective, moment of crisis, like Rekha was talking about, and also, sort of this moment of collective pause. I mean, it's a very, very poetic, on a very poetic level, quite removed from what Rekha was addressing. And one of the things that my imagination leads me to do, just in order for me to deal with this sort of, the amputation of, an amputation in crisis, is that I look at this moment as a very poetic moment. Sorry, I'm digressing from the question, Rebecca, but I'll sort of come back to your question about materials. I've been wanting to talk about how, there's been a lot of engagement with how should one, what is the answer to late capitalism? And it's been quite amazing to observe in the last 1 month that it took a virus for, this sort of hyper form of capitalism to suddenly come to a halt. And sitting in Delhi today, the AQI is actually good. We have never had such a clear skies. So it just took a month of all the wheels to stop churning at a very heavy cost, of course, like Rekha has addressed. It comes at a heavy cost, but when has humanity ever been devoid of crisis? The Syrians, the thing about this crisis is that it's a collective crisis, not because I am any more empathetic than I am on my everyday, but what I'm faced with is my own mortality and mortality of the ones that are close to me. I'm a terribly selfish and individualistic human being. I have no qualms about admitting that. And I think, why I'm more empathetic, because I can only relate to the world through my own subjectivity. So what's happening right now is that fear of this virus harming my grandmother who's ailing, or, affecting my parents who are old, is the only reason that I'm empathetic. So, so I suppose, we touched about going back to capitalism. It's one of the other things I've been sort of, looking at is will capitalism, like Reena was talking about adapting, will capitalism adapt, or will it, change? Will it just simply mutate into another form? Like museums and galleries are already having virtual shows. It's the wheels of capitalism already adapting very quickly. So then what was Marx talking about? Is Marx just a very beautiful lyricist, or is he a poet, or was he, an economist at all? And like yeah, that's these are just like random thoughts. And I'm sorry, I suffer from ADD, so I can never keep to like a single strain of thought. But coming back to materials, I think art making is magical. And I think that when you make magic, you make something out of nothing. You make things appear, you make things disappear. And that is the ability of art. I mean, if you look at Rekha's paintings, there's moments of like void in them. There's moments of appearance, moments of disappearance. When I saw Reena's very beautiful installation at Chemold a couple of years ago, which is currently on view in Boston as well at the ICA, this you see this like woven web of this map, and then these sounds that are there that are not there, and and the materials aren't very expensive, and it's just sort of, I mean, I'm sure that Reena, even pre the crisis, was still making art out of nothing. And same with Rekha, you're constantly, art comes from a place of void, which is a nothing. So I can go on about that, but Reena.
No, there's a lot of interesting things you touched upon, and I agree. Well, it's not even a question of agreeing or not agreeing. I mean, I think we're all looking at just sort of, grappling with all these different things, and yeah, capitalism will always try to continue. But the thing is, I guess my really challenging, the big question I mean, obviously, and it's for you all to answer, but I mean, can that we need human connectivity. We need to touch. We need to, we're all struggling with that right now. I mean, it's not enough just to have a virtual show or just to have a virtual chat, even though this is really beneficial and our voices are heard, and it's a great opportunity. But I don't know if that will last. I think that, I mean, I'd love to know what you think, and this state of hardship that we're in, maybe we can see it as a creative space. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, Reena, you work in your work. I'm so fascinated because it stems so many different materials, also videos. So you could kind of adapt to this virtual space at the moment. But then, it still needs that physical touch as well, in the long term.
Well, yes. I mean, I really love working with materials. So yes, the physicality really matters, and I don't think any of us on the panel would sort of say that human experience of actually physically interacting with, whether it's objects, people, can ever be replaced by being on a screen. So certainly that, I mean, we're all hoping that this is a temporary phase and that we are going to come out on the other side. And so while we're in this situation, I think we all know, like Rekha spoke about our resilience, and I mean, I think for those of us who've actually, worked for now, in my case, about 25 years, Rekha, much more, and we've all come and lived through the time when there was almost nothing. There was no art market. You actually just made work out of anything that was available. So the economy of means has always been something that artists have embraced, and there's no reason for us to not continue to work in whatever medium that's possible and around us. And we always find ways of communicating and connecting. But I mean, I think certainly the whole structure of not just in subject matter, but there is going to be a change in the possibilities of art and what, for a long time to come. And we will find our own individual ways of sort of responding to that. And but I do think that, I mean, if we could just use this moment, this crisis, to not just go back to doing exactly what we did, but instead, remind ourselves that yeah, we are actually, we have the right to enjoy these clear skies, enjoy, having, say, to breathe fresh, clean air, to go back to the mountains, which none of us really have time to do because of all the lives that we've ended up. So I think this, for me, this is really, hopefully this will put us to re-question our own ways of living and consuming things around us, and that hopefully would lead to sort of fundamental shifts in our imaginations.
Yeah, no, that's I mean, beautifully put. I think we're all in a period in some ways. It's sort of like a giant parentheses, a giant pause. It's a moment where we can, go inward and have some introspection on our lives, and things just, I mean, I know at least to focus on the art world, things just were getting way too, I know from a lot of people, it was just an extremely, extremely busy schedule, and it almost left very little room for moments of solitude, which everybody needs, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert or a mixture of both. We all need time for introspection. That's part of being human, actually. But the modern world, the capitalist world, or whatever you want to call it, really wasn't allowing that. And I think maybe this is somehow, it's just this thing is organically happened, this crisis. But it is kind of, to end on this note with this last sort of thought or question, which we can discuss, is, I mean, we are in a crisis. We don't know when it will end. And as you were saying, all three of you feel very privileged, to be creating as you do, to be living as you do. Do you feel at all that this crisis, Rekha, you're mentioning you felt the need to also have the voice for the younger generation, people who just really are really struggling right now as artists. Do you feel that there's a space now for other artists to help those that are really, I mean, probably pretty soon going to be living day to day, if not already? How do you, I think that's the big question, because people have lost their jobs all over the world. I mean, the US is looking at a Great Depression sort of situation. I mean, India is in a whole another situation. So how can, it's a question on everyone's lips, is how can we join forces, forget the art market, but just to help people survive when you can't see them,
No,
You
absolutely.
physically see them, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is where technology is extremely helpful because there are already initiatives where people are trying to find platforms where they don't take any money, but they put people in touch with low budget art so that it's not too much to ask for somebody to buy something for 5,000 or 10,000 rupees, because money is important. Let us not be coy about that. Money allows you to sustain yourself. But now, if there is going to be a new given, I think that you will find that perhaps it has produced the ideas of contemplation about how to make life simpler. I think all of us make our choices. I think the three of us are active practitioners by choice. It's the politics, our own personal politics, that drives us, either our ambitions or our targets or our needs or opportunities that are exciting. So none of us are apologetic about the kind of lifestyles that we have or the kind of schedules that we've had. But what it has done for us, this moment of crisis, is to also allow us to understand that when all of this has fallen away, we still haven't actually stopped being who we are. And it's allowed us to actually come in touch with something where there are new possibilities, not necessarily about the kind of art we make, but the kind of choices we make. I in particular have, and I'm sure there are many people who do these things. My partner, Surendran, and I have been for many years, for almost 35 years, running what we call the Collective Studio Baroda, which is not registered. We don't get any tax benefit, nothing. And we've been always helping young artists who have no means, whether it's, getting funding or, giving them, they've stayed with us, they eat at our table, whatever, for years. Now, the point is, every one of us can do a small bit within a society, and that small bit adds up and becomes a big thing. So I remember when I came back and I was all of 26 years old, and I come from a very privileged, background, but I chose to be economically independent right from the age of 18. And in India, that's a tough thing to do. It's not earning pocket money, but actually earning your own living. Why I'm saying this is I found the attitudes of people interesting to perceive, and I've carried that memory with me. And so to help somebody without them asking for help is also an initiative we need to do. So crises should, I think that all of us must hold the card of empathy. I'm sorry, I'm not somebody who would wear a badge of a self-obsessed, focus with any pride. I think the privilege of my birth insists that I must hold focus for others. So I think this time now necessitates how each of us, finds the politics of our being as artists and as people, and find bridges by which we can find ways to connect and create the empathy that helps. That's factual, that's real, and that's not just about, armchair philosophy.
I'd love to have Reena and Tanya also just, your thoughts as well on this sort of, I guess what, Rekha was saying is giving back and I guess forging a community.
What Rekha was talking about. Sorry, am I speaking over you? Go ahead.
No, I can hear. I think it's just
the lights on.
I think that to take off from what Rekha was saying, that we really need to build a safety net for various forms of not just practice, of course, since we are talking about art on this panel, to think of whether they're theater practices or writers, poets, besides artists who actually make physical objects that can then be bought and sold. But I find that a lot of other professions that are around the arts and within the arts are not really supported. So when we don't have enough state funding, we've had private initiatives that are actually trying to build a certain, like I said, net. That is something like what Rekha said, that she's been doing. They've been doing this, for younger artists and younger practitioners. That is really something that we have to address, which again, a lot of our galleries, museums are trying to do. But to come to the other part of your question, I think, yes, now more than ever, we realize our sort of interdependence. Much of the work that I do is about, some of it is looking at the ecological and thinking of how the disappearance of one results in the disappearance of another, whether it's to do with within the same species or interspecies and so on. I think at this moment, it really stares us in the face that of how our lives are so interdependent on each other, and how we need to come together to resolve this.
Yeah, that's true. And Tanya, just I guess if you're interested, if you
I could say a couple of things.
Yeah.
Well, being a young artist still, as I'd like to think, I think I have a long way to catch up, in terms of giving back. But one of the things that I can give back is my understanding of color. I've spent the last 13 to 14 years observing color, digital and physical, different theories of light. And I think what I can give back would be to and via the institution. I have been sort of working on a course on how we understand color. I think a lot of art institutions do suffer, have extensively suffered, having coming from Baroda and seeing the decline of the university, seeing how the courses have not developed, have not caught up with different mediums and technology. So I think the way I can possibly or will definitely give back is via teaching in the future.
Okay. Well, that's it's been a really, really wonderful conversation. I feel that we could go on for a long time. There's just so many different aspects of this. But I think in conclusion, unless any of you have something else you'd like to add, a topic maybe that I've missed or that we wanted to speak more about, I feel that art has a strong, a very strong role to play. I do still feel over the last 2 months, because we've been in this situation, I think until it really started at the end of February, beginning of March, but that while there is a whole focus on sort of these dire aspects, I think art has a fundamental role to play. And ultimately, something that came to me as I was listening to all of you is that, and as you were saying, that you might not be actively curating every single day, but it might be even in a few months, you might create artwork that was inspired by this lockdown. There might be a show at the Met or a museum in a few years that's about lockdown art. And for me, what I love—
That's a scary thought.
Well, maybe it's not so scary. Maybe we'll look back on this and we'll look at all the very interesting thoughts and sort of, artwork that was created. It could be seen as scary and maybe not scary, but ultimately there definitely will be creation, because we're creating every day. And what was I going to say is that I guess what I've loved about being, you know, a journalist or a writer, predominantly, you know, an art writer, or an art historian or whatever, is that I find art ultimately is the ultimate document of a certain historical period. It's the artwork that lives on. You know, I'm obviously a writer. The writing does live on, but there's something about a visual work of art, digital or physical, that translates an emotion that we can't always capture in words or in writing. And you know, you look at these incredible monuments from history, and that's what will last. There will be art created during this period, and we will remember this period in some ways, I think, through the art. I mean, I'm hypothesizing again, but it's just a thought that's come to me after listening to this, because it will be documented in some ways, not just from the journalism and the terrible things that have happened in terms of coronavirus, but it'll be documented also through art, I feel. But that's just my own.
It's been the crowd of times. I mean, with that too.
Are we taking questions from our audience?
Yes, I'm really, I mean, I'm really grateful. This is, you know, I'm getting used to moderating these virtual panels, and I'm really enjoying it, but it is a new experience for me not to be physically close to people. But I won't be taking the questions. I think it's Ashvin or Upasana, maybe Upasana, who's behind the scenes. He'll be taking in the questions from people and directing them to the right panelists, and they will answer. But I just want to say I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to speak with all of you, and I've learned a lot. It's very insightful, and you know, it picks up your spirit to have these conversations right now, and I'm really grateful to Ashvin and Upasana for the opportunity. So I feel that there's always a spirit of creativity, you know, even during these times of crisis, and that's what, you know, brings us through, gets us through. So thank you again, and I will just, I guess, pass this over. I can't see them, but to Upasana and Ashvin to sort of, I guess, read out the questions. That's what I think. That's how it will work.
Just a small technical glitch. You're going to hear my voice, and I'm going to read out some questions. The first question is, what should be the approach for young and new artists moving forward in this time?
Ashwin, I think you should direct a question to to a specific panelist. That would be much better.
Why don't you take that?
I agree. The question hasn't been directed to anybody, but Reena, would you like to take this question?
I was going to say maybe Rekha, you should take it.
Reena, do it, please.
Well, I mean, I just think that in terms of to just keep working. I mean, because I don't think that to keep speculating on what might be possible, what are the platforms, how to continue this process of thinking, making, which is just so sort of integral to living, like we spoke earlier, that it's like breathing, and I think there's always going to be certain channels, certain platforms that will that one would find one's work more suited to, and of course to keep the flexibility and open-mindedness of responding to opportunities. And I think where some of us just started when there was almost nothing, there were no grants to apply, there was no major funding backing to create large-scale installations. You know, sometimes we would withdraw from exhibition invitations, say for biennials, because you just felt that we were not on an equal platform, and how would we, present work with artists who actually have such huge support systems. But I think over time you realize that that it didn't really matter. It could just be pencil on paper, and it can be as powerful a medium as anything else. So I think to find fallen, pieces or objects around you, and today we know, I mean, the whole range or the gamut of possibilities is so wide that it's only up to you to think and put forth a new sort of way of approaching things that would be something that, and also to believe that because it does take time, and I know that as very nascent practices can completely sort of be suppressed at this time, or you feel demotivated to work because you just don't see the future. But I think to keep believing in every moment of your life and continuing to live and is so important, because nobody else knows you better than yourself, and no other vision is as unique as yours. So just believe in that and keep going.
Absolutely.
There's a question for Rekha. The question is, my question to all the three artists is that, as someone who has seen art in a contemporary moment and also seen it historically, there is a certain value for artwork that is angst-driven as opposed to art that is celebratory. What do you three think will be the COVID-19 takeaway?
I think
It's not over yet.
the question has the answer in itself. I think that, the spectrum of how human emotions respond to things is not something that is formula driven. I have seen people in deep crises and deep anxiety, very, very stoic and very, very, withdrawn. And you would imagine, from a kind of premise of prejudgment, that person is not, responding. But they are responding. They respond differently. And I think that we cannot give a kind of, what do you call it? The Chinese cookie, the fortune cookie. You can't give a fortune cookie answer to this. You can't say that COVID-19 is going to, bring out something that is all about angst. It may also be that, people hold the joy and celebration of survival. That, this in this unknown space of whether you are going to be touched by something that can kill you, or certainly, impinge on your health, that it doesn't happen. You can also bring about that, space of recognizing the joy and gratitude of life around you. So I think we have to wait and watch. I personally have a very simple, I've said this on many, many interviews, and I'll very quickly say this here, that, all of us, and of course, we're talking about a specific incident, a specific scenario and situation that is global, and I'm not trivializing this. But on the other hand, there are ways by which to find that space to hope. Now, all of us have moments where we really, think that, we're so sorry for ourselves. We believe that we need to have sort of sympathy and pity and whatever else, and we drown in it. But those are moments when I hold certain visuals as reminders of how little my own sorrow is. And one of the things that I've always held as very important is a visual of children who are landmine victims, whose half their bodies are truncated, they're just being blown off, and they're playing soccer. They're playing soccer, and they're so, the delight on their face. Tell me, in my moment of sorrow, how can that ever add up to that? So I think that what I'm trying to say, and I'm not religious or trying to sound, poetic or anything, we need to find those focuses that allow us to take ourselves. And as Reena said, art is not only about taking it into a gallery space and into a museum. And it's not about, my time and your time. It's about realizing that art is about this. And you have a need to negotiate the world, and your position of negotiation is what you hold as valuable. And you will then find that ability, whether it's through material, through articulation, through absence, if anything, that you will find your way to decipher it.
I think I would like to just add one thing, is that there are so many speculations about what will come post-COVID. Brings out the most anxiety in me. It really scares me, because we're too, I think we're too, or at least I am, all of us are quite still steeped in it, and we cannot quite see beyond it or outside of it. And since we can't even go outside of our own homes, what we are only absorbing is information through the media. What I've been looking at is a lot of research done by a lot of very, very engaging people. And what it seems like this is a moment of World War III. We were expecting it, but it's come in the form of it's an information war at large. I mean, I'm speculating, but these are collective speculations that I've been sort of researching, and I suppose what Rekha has was also talking about is very interesting. That how can we, as someone who's privileged, how do we possibly mourn, like recently I just broke up within this pandemic with my ex-boyfriend now, but like I cannot even bring myself to shed a tear because I feel so privileged and so thankful for my position right now. So that is something, Rekha, that this pandemic has made me feel. I don't know how I will feel after the pandemic, but this is currently I'm unable to. I mean, I am able to, empathize in some way. Yeah.
People come out in their balconies and singing, and sort of this sense of communal spirit that is, of course, there is the underpinning of sorrow, grief, and mourning, but also there's a celebration of, you have graffiti on the streets, we're seeing so many forms in the way people have activated what they feel and externalized it, whether it's through, say, gestures, performance, sound, so there are various ways in which each of us would find our own ways to respond. And like I said, I mean, we can't predict whether we're going, the path we might choose to take, or you have all these different time frames within the past, the present, the future. So our speculations can, take us in different directions. But yeah, I think much more I have to say.
I think we've kind of gone way over time, but I'm happy to pose another question since they're coming in. If you guys are okay, I can read it out. Otherwise, I mean, please feel free to tell me or tell us that it's been quite a long chat.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Please.
So the question is to all the artists: do you see your art going digital? Do you think you might start to make work that can be only experienced through the digital medium, and actually work with other tech that can be accessed even during isolation and lockdown?
Please indicate which artist should start responding.
We can start with you, Rekha.
I think that, it's early days yet, but I do presume that, it's interesting how certain situations will provoke certain types of opportunities. And I certainly do think that, we are already very, very much a global society that uses, all kinds of very quick, very immediate ways by which of connecting and communicating. I mean, years ago, somebody like David Hockney was using the fax, which was, in those days, the facsimile was this big thing, and he was doing drawings and sending it. So these are not actually new things. It depends, I think that there will be people who will invent and create, forms or where, taking an image to something else, to some other place, whether it's projections or whatever it is in a city, or, technology will certainly afford us a lot of imaginative spaces. And I think that it will be a kind of quote unquote opportunity that will be taken up as an idea, even when the lockdown maybe is not there, because it will perhaps create the kind of curatorial space that allows for the ideation of how this lockdown you know, has created a structure of imprint in history. And so it may very well be that, you know, there will be number, you know, I wonder whether the Kochi Biennale, if it does happen, you know, has something that is devoted to this, because this is the way new ideational spaces are created and how we chart new histories. I wouldn't at all be surprised. And, you know, whether you're 61 years old or however young, you know, other artists may be, you have to be concurrent with time. Time, you know, when you say I am a contemporary artist, you are concurrent with the time and the situations, and then whatever material you use is a choice. It's not because you are ill-informed, but there are choices with which you decide what your, you know, articulation is. But to answer your question, definitely the digital era is here. It'll stay. It'll change its form. It'll become more, and I think many exciting curations are going to happen about, you know, from this, from the digital way of pronouncing an idea.
I have a thing to respond to Rekha. Rekha, you just spoke about how time is concurrent. I think one of the things that the pandemic and this suspension of time, this is what I look at it. I look at it as a complete melting pot of time, because, you know, capitalist time has melted. What is an 8-hour day?
Tanya, I said artists, whatever their age are living within the concurrentness of time.
No, I know. Rekha, I'm only conceptually responding to the notion of what concurrent time is.
I was not talking about this time and concurrency. I was saying the use of using digital is now something that all artists are privy to, irrespective of what their age is, because very often you will have people stating that because they are, you know, in their 50s or 60s, it's not their articulation. And that is the point I was making. So I don't know.
Right. No, I know. And I'm a deconstructionalist, Rekha. I'm so sorry. I deconstruct language. I was just picking up the term concurrent time, completely decontextualizing it from your context. What I was trying to say is that the pandemic has collapsed the notion of the past, present, and future, which is perhaps what the digital era might be able to do. What is time in our memory? I've been sort of having these strange, like, you know, lapses in my memory, and strange sort of like, you know, passing from like what is now, what I was as a being maybe 2 years ago, what I was 10. I just wanted to engage with the idea of time on a more deeper level, since, you know, and how do we view time digitally? Yeah, I completely am in agreement with everything that you were saying. I was just you know, sort of yeah, picking up terms from your very poetic you know, response. Reena is, you know.
I was going to say that certainly there will be a real push with technology. I mean, that definitely a lot more platforms, whether it's, say, social media, Instagram, which has been, you know, a lot of artists have been using that platform very, very effectively and creating art. So it's not like, you know, with photography, it was more a record, and then a lot of artists made videos purely to record performances, and then that has become a medium in itself since decades. And then I think these are also defining moments that are going to give a further push in the direction where, so VR or AI or VR, and, you know, all of these technologies will certainly get far more activated now more than ever before. And like we said, they're not mutually exclusive or replacing one for the other, but certainly we will see the proliferation of all of these in the near future.
You know, Reena, also the space of archiving is going to be so vital now, because, you know, the histories cannot collapse. And so the way that histories will now transpose itself will be very interestingly, previously archiving was something of, importance in terms of keeping the chronicle. And now it's actually going to be, the space of actual communication, because if the digital is the area, or the technology becomes the sort of connectivity, then that you have this immediate sort of, laser beam into something that, and so I think much more of an endeavor is going to happen to archive. I really,
that people respond back. So it's, I mean, the audience shift that we were talking about from the physical space here, you put out something and so many people respond, and that is both a two-way process and no longer one-sided. So there are going to be various ways that artists can then engage and explore the space of social interaction, which of course we are all going to learn as we use it and sort of develop new skills along the way. It's a good time to close. We have gone on an hour and a half.
Thank you all. Yes, it's been a spectacular session. We've been running for about an hour and a half. I'd like to thank all the participants. We couldn't get to all the questions. We'll try and reach out to you and connect to the artists offline. But thank you all for attending. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Rebecca. It's been a wonderful session. It's been recorded, so this will go up on YouTube at some point so that people can use this as a resource to learn from this experience. But thank you very much, and good night.
Thank you, Ashvita, Asna, Rebecca, Rekha.
Great to meet you, and hope to see you in the future in person.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Take care,
Thanks a lot.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.